All right, we're going to be putting together a 2D scene here. We're going to need to create some sprites. I'm going to go over not the whole process. You guys have some Illustrator skills to speak of, but let's go over what specifically is important for what I use getting things into Unity from Illustrator, but a few drawing techniques and a few organizational things. First of all, when we're making the Illustrator files, templates, you want to come over to Film and Video to make sure you get a transparent background. This is I'm going to work on a tree, so we're going to have a car and some trees. And so let's go ahead and make this 1500 by 1500. And the other main thing is that here under Advanced, that it does say 72 ppi, not greater than that, not 300. You got to be careful. Sometimes in Illustrator, the settings are for print, and the print would be at 72 ppi, which is not ideal for what we want for Unity. So we're okay there. All right, and I have a couple of things I'm doing here. So we'll come back to the car, but this is a tree I made on my tablet. So I have an Android tablet, and I've been using a drawing application called Concepts. And those of you who have iPads, Procreate is one that people like. And the thing about Concepts is that it can export a vector file, because when we go to Unity, we're going to send a PNG, okay, so a raster file, not a vector file. But Concepts does allow me to draw and then export as an SVG, and SVG is scalable vector graphic, I think. And then that comes into Illustrator as vectors, paths, right? Not one image. And so I can clean it up in here. And so, for instance, I could grab all of this stuff, just get the V tool for the selection, Control C. And the reason I'm pasting it into a new artboard here is when the file I brought in from Concepts had all the layers and everything, but it was there was some other junk in there, and I just wanted to just clean this up and just have a fresh file to start from. So if you're coming from Procreate or something like that on the iPad, there's no reason to bring it in here to clean it up. Okay, if you're coming in from Concepts, there's a free version of Concepts. I got the pro version's like $10 or something, but the free version on an iPad, an Android tablet. And so I just want to get rid of a few things here and then just make this line weight a little bit bigger. And so let's look at the layers. And I got all the lines, I think, organized in this layer. And so now if I were to bump that up, kind of like so. And I want to make sure that there. Some of these lines, let's see here, what's going on with this? I think it's just the opacity on a few of these. There we go. I was just a little sloppy when I was drawing this on the tablet, in that a couple of these lines ended up on another layer that didn't have the right opacity set. So I'm just making sure that they're solid like all the other lines, so it looks a little bit more consistent. And there we go. Here and here. Okay, and I don't want this. Sometimes the vectors come in strangely. I don't want that dot. Just get rid of that. I don't want that dot either. And you see there's some overlap here. I actually want some of these layers in front. So let's come back up a level, and move one of these up, like so. The trunk is below, and let's move these up. I'm going to get these out of that layer. A lot of Illustrator work ends up being this kind of layer management issue. And so here I really like each of these tree zones to be its own layer. Let's grab all of these, and here, 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 here. And now we should be able to, I believe on Illustrator it's Alt-G, or if we just right-click. In Cinema 4D it's Alt-G. We want to group these. There we go. There we go. So now that's on top. Cool. And so now if we turn that off, get all of these, and here, here, that one. Cool. And now group those. That's great. Turn that off. And this gets easier and easier as you whittle it down, because now it's just that stuff. And now I can grab all of these and group these together. There we go. And so now I can put those on top of each other like I want. Cool. And let's come back up to the top here on this one. Okay, so I'm holding down some Illustrator shortcuts. V for the select tool, right? So that allows me to select, in this case, each of these groups, right? So this whole group. If I need to come in and actually edit some points, I'm zooming in and out by holding down the Z key and dragging in and out, and then H allows me to move it around. So that gives me that kind of navigation that I have in the 3D programs, which is, just more, just makes more sense for me. So Z in and out, click and drag to zoom, and then H to click and drag. It's a little bit like using the Alt key in the 3D programs. And cool. That's good. Now we need to think a little bit. This is just like animating in After Effects, in that when we bring things in, the layer of control, the control we're going to have is based on layers, top level layers. So in Unity, we can access top level layers independently, and we need to think about breaking these things up into separate parts. So for instance here with this tree, we can demonstrate this. I'm going to kind of break this up into component parts that I can then use in Unity to create more variation. So in order to do that, they're going to be turned into essentially one sprite sheet that I can access in Unity. So I'm going to go ahead and save our version right now. File, save as, and save this as tree vector original. All right, and so this version will be the one that I would go back to if I need to edit any paths, change the actual visual display of the drawing. Okay, and down here, we need to export one as a PNG that we're going to be able to use in Unity as a sprite sheet. So this may be kind of confusing here at first, but once we go through it, you'll see what the deal is. Okay, because sprite sheets are essentially like images that have different parts or different animated frames either. And we break them up and put them on one image. Why? Because it's faster. Computer can just load one image and sort of access parts of it. So I'm going to go File, Save As, and call this Tree Sprite Sheet. We'll just call it Tree Sprite Sheet. There we go. All right, so now that's fine. I'm going to take these groups and move them. So I'm in the artboard. Don't go outside the artboard. But I'm moving them and so that they don't intersect with each other. The key here is that when you click the group, you get the square around the group. And what we don't want to have is the square, this appearing in this square. So for instance, if this were like this, where this part is being included here, that would not be good. Because when Unity breaks it up, it's going to break it up using these squares. It wants to draw a square around each component, kind of like this. And so I'm in the sprite sheet. I moved everything around by staying within the artboard edges, and I'm good. All right, so let's go ahead and save this one. File, export as. We want to export as a PNG. And we want to use the artboard, okay? Because if you don't say use artboard, it'll sort of crop it in. And in this case, we don't want to do that. So tree sprite sheet, PNG, use artboard, it's great. This is in there. And you see that it has not cropped it in. We have the transparent background, 72 ppi. Boom, great. All right, let's go to Unity and start setting up our 2D project. So again, we're going to be making a scene with a car driving and some trees to sort of get our basic 2D workflow down. And so I'm going to make a new 2D project. Call this car scene. There we go. Create. There we go. All right, great. Cool. There we go. Great. Let's start setting this one up. So I'm going to make a new folder so that all of my stuff is in there, called Farina car. And inside here, here's where I can bring things in. So that image I just made, I don't know why I made the tiny one. All right, let's bring this one in. And there we go. Cool. Now, clearly you can bring a sprite into the scene just by merely dragging it into the scene. Okay, obviously we don't want to do that because this doesn't look like a tree. How do we reassemble our tree? And why do we take it apart in the first place? Well, we can reassemble it here by telling, right now it's all one thing. And what we want to have access to is the individual parts. And so right now, everything together into one sprite, we have a sprite sheet, okay? Multi-components on one image. And how do I change it to access these? In the project, we select, and we don't want it to be one sprite. but we want it to, where is it? Oh, yeah, sprite mode, multiple. Cool. And now, if we open up the Sprite Editor, this button right here, we have to apply multiple, then we get the Sprite Editor. Cool. Now, you get this window here, the Sprite Editor. This allows us to essentially cut it up into individual pieces. And so I can go to Slice, and there is an automatic slicer, which I usually just try at the beginning. Let's see. Sometimes it figures it out. There we go. That's good. So now it sliced it into each one. You see that there's no overlapping, like no part comes into the box of another part. And now that's good. And now I need to apply that. Now you see I get this little arrow over here, and I have individual parts, which I can drag into my scene individually. Cool. And so now I could use these things to create multiple trees, right? So if I grab all of these now, and I were to there is a command for this in Unity for grouping. Make parent, create empty. Let's do it this way. I'm going to make a new blank game object. Create empty. Make sure it's at 0. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and put the tree in there. Actually, before we do this, let's go ahead and change one thing first. I'm going to come back in here. If I want to get back to this, I select the top level and go back to Sprite Editor. As you select them, for this tree, it's not going to matter very much. But this guy right here, this is the anchor point for the image, okay? And so these are, that's fine to have them in the middle for these clusters. But here, for the trunk, it's going to make more sense. Let's put this at the bottom, just for the sake of organization. And then apply that. If I go to close the window, it'll say, yes, apply. There we go. And so now, if I were to drag this up here, you see that the anchor point is at the bottom of this. That's good. Cool. And so now, game object. If I drag these up underneath, they become a child of that game object. Why am I doing this? So I can just take this game object, right? So now they're here. Let's go ahead and you see that I put them at the origin by default. Let's rotate this one. There we go, I like that. Yeah. And I got this one. There we go. Kind of like so. And this one I will call tree 1. Okay. And the anchor point for tree 1 is at the bottom, which is where it would make sense for placing a tree. And so now, back to the top here, let's make a new folder. There we go. We're going to call this prefabs. Right? So remember, a prefab is sort of a stamp for a game object. It's a pattern for one. So I'm going to open up prefabs, and we can make a prefab by taking this object right here and dragging it down into here, right? And so now I have tree, right? And if I want multiple ones, and the nice thing about the tree prefab here, let's go ahead. What happened here? Why did this one? Let's get rid of that one. Let's get this order right. So now, before we do this, this is the one thing about Unity and 2D. it's still 3D, right? So even though I'm in here, it's this button right here that's sort of keeping the editor in 2D versus 3D, okay? And so all the Z, if you click on anything, they still have Z components. And you can use the Z coordinates. You can use Z to move things forward and backwards. They're just all very thin things. They don't have any depth like a mesh does, right? And so this leads to some problems with what is in front, okay? And the primary mode for controlling what is in front and what's not is going to be sorting layers, okay? Let's, this is where the Unity terminology gets a little confusing. Sorting layers, not Sunity, Unity sorting layers. Part of the reason we use Unity is the documentation is really good, right? And so when you're in the documentation, there's the manual, and then if you're looking for things specifically about scripting, you switch to it's a whole separate side of the manual. So pay attention to which one you're looking at. If you're seeing a bunch of code, you're probably in this side. When if you're just using an object, you want to figure it out over here. So the sorting layer is it controls what's in front of what. So how do you control sorting layers? In the sprites here, you'll see that sorting layer is right here. And ideally, you want to have your different categories of things in different sorting layers. So for instance, I'm going to make a sorting layer called tree, and then you can have front and back within that layer. And so here, I'm going to add a sorting layer called tree, right? And it will appear there. Now, the thing that is confusing, sorting layers are visual front and backness. Layers are different. Layers are just sort of like a way to organize objects that it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what's in front of what, okay? So I think these two things could be named better, but it is what it is. Sorting layers are front and back. Layers are just sort of grouping things together and being able to address them as a group. Okay, so we're not going to worry about this right now. Sorting layers is what we're primarily concerned with. And so now, back here, this one, this one, this one. Where's the trunk? Okay, that one. Okay, so these three are the other parts. I'm going to go ahead and put those on tree. It's all going to go on tree. And then I want to make sure that the trunk, yeah, and so the lower number is in front. And so in this case, the higher number is in front. Z is facing forward, right? And so the trunk is now forward. And so we actually want all the tree parts to be 1, and then the trunk to be 0. Now, this is just ordering, right? So if there's any inside part, all of these just need to be in front of the truck. And so in this part, I'm actually going to go ahead and say 3, 2, and 1. It's not going to change the visual pattern. It's just going to give me some more room. There's no limit as to how high you can go with this number. It's just a way to organize things within that prefab. And so now this is good. Whenever I make a prefab, I want to reset the position. There we go. So it's at 0, 0, 0. This prefab here, I'm going to go ahead and delete because the sorting layers weren't worked out. And this one, I'm going to go ahead and drag it back down into the prefabs folder. There we go. And now, let's come back to the 2D view. There we go. Hopefully, every time we drag this up, it is correct, right? So if you don't have the sorting layers right, you'll see what that problem I ran into right away. Things will just be inconsistent. Like some things will be in front, some things will be in back, and you can't make heads or tails out of it. And so that is what you want to avoid. And so you gotta, as soon as you bring in new stuff, you've got to get the sorting layers figured out. And so we can add more layers later for different things, but here I'm able to easily make a tree. Now, since I broke it up into these component parts, I don't need to go back to Illustrator to draw another tree. I can sort of use these component parts just to construct a tree variation here. So if I come back over here and come and put another tree in here. Let's construct a second tree out of this one, like a taller one, a variation. Maybe it has slightly different color. So again, let's keep this simple for now, just having that one tree in there. And let's move this over. There we go. And let's make another tree. And so I'll bring in a trunk, like so. And this one. I could scale some of these parts. Let's say, if you hold down Shift, it'll keep it. There we go, taller tree. And I could come in here with some of these sprites. And for instance, if I were to grab these sprites, where's the trunk? Right there. And make all these a child of the trunk. There we go. And reset the trunk. There we go. And let's go ahead. You could change some of the color on some of these. There we go. Just sort of creating some variation. There we go. Nice. Let's make this trunk just, slightly different. Something like that. There we go. Different tree. And again, let's go ahead and rename this tree 2. And this one, as you may have guessed, is going into the prefabs folder. And so now, before I drag it down to the prefabs, actually, let's fix the, let's come up with a process. Our process is going to be make sure the hierarchy is correct, so everything is a child of the trunk, and the trunk anchor point is correct, and the trunk is reset to 0, 0, 0. Good. Next, work out all the sorting layers. So I have the whole thing set, sorting layer tree, and then we want to make sure that all these parts are above 0, so something like 2. And then here, that's at 0. Cool. Now this is ready for to be prefabricated. And now, boom. Cool. So now I've got 2 trees that I could use to put things together and create some sort of forest. Cool. There we go. I'm putting things together, creating trees. So that's our basic workflow, right? So the idea is that when you make these assets for your game, whether they be 2D or 3D, it's best to think in a way of creating a modular asset, right? Like you're using Legos where you have different parts. Think about the design of the thing you're making, break it down into component parts that could be slightly reconfigured to create variation in the game. That way every tree doesn't look the same and every rock doesn't look the same, right? By creating, we'll be able to use this principle in 3D to some extent as well. But here in 2D, the sprite sheet is the main way for achieving that. Breaking it up into component parts. The component parts are on the sprite sheet, right? Which is what we did here. And then in the Unity, we're able to break those component parts up and then create multiple prefabs. And so I have 2 trees now. And I could obviously do this as much as I want to create more and more tree variations with these different parts. And they're all kind of using the same parts, so you also get this sort of visual continuity for free. And since they're prefabs, remember the prefab part of it is really important, because then they're smart copies. If I double click on the prefab, it'll open up, you see it kind of go into, it looks like the breadcrumb view from Illustrator, or scenes, now you're in prefab 1. So now if I make any changes here, like if I were to slightly change the color of this sprite, there we go, and then I go back up, it's changed in every one where that's an instance of that prefab is changed. So that's the power of prefabs. Like if I send this to my client and they say, great, we want to see the trees be pink. Instead of having to go back and recolor all the trees, you can simply click on one prefab and grab color. There you go. Since they're green, this isn't going to work great, but let's say the client said orange or blue. There we go. Right? And so now I can come back here. Since I did it in the prefab menu, if I come back to the scene, there's my blue trees against the red tree. Okay, so the power of prefabs, right? And we're able to put them all together. Over here, in terms of organization now, I would definitely think about starting to put these together to keep this window under control. So make a new game object over here, empty, just called trees, and put them all in there. That way it makes it easier to manage. If I need to do some stuff and just not see any trees, I can just turn them all on and off. Makes it much easier. And then if I need to come in and manage any of the trees, I can do that. Cool. There we go. Not too bad. So that's creating a sprite sheet from Illustrator and bringing it in to create variation. I'm going to do another one here in a second using the car. All right. See you guys in a minute.